The topic of my presentation will be, perhaps it should be more precise, more social justice by formula-based financing or by need-based financing of the Austrian school system. This is an idea that we have developed 5 years ago and which is now very intensively discussed in the Austrian politics, and we still hope that this model will become in reality to improve social justice in the Austrian school systems. I will give you a short overview about the Austrian situation. Then I will introduce the idea of need-based financing of the school system. I will present you a concrete model for Austria, draw some conclusion, and will finish with some open questions. You must not read the left side, but just to give you an idea, the Austrian school system, we have two formal goals of the school system. One goal is equal opportunities, and the second goal is that each student, each child should reach a certain level of education. So we say this is a guarantee of reaching a minimum education. And we have done in the last, and Austria also has the system of a national report of the educational system, and in the last report of the educational system of Austria, we have analyzed if the Austrian school system has reached these two goals in the last years, and our conclusion was that Austria in all has only an average performance even compared to other countries. For example, if we take Pearl's, TIMSS or the PISA results, we have a very strong dependence of competences and school career on social background variables. Most important still the socioeconomic status of the parents, or the social status of the parents. Less important is the migration background, speaking another language, or the gender. And if we look at a certain level of the school, that means the end of the primary school, which is in Austria in the year when a child is 10 years old, then the place of living is also very important, because a child in an urban area has much more opportunities than a child in a rural area. We have a very strong composition effect, so very strong context effects. That means the social composition of the class, of the school, has a very strong impact on the performance of a child. We have a very large number of students with low competences. In the PISA testing, our numbers about 20% or 25% are below level 1. That means they only can solve very easy tasks with a probability of 60%. And our school system is very expensive. So we have a very expensive school system, we have only average performance, and we have a strong selective school systems. And what is the topic of my presentation is today that the social background, which influences the school career in Austria very strong, plays no role in financing the school systems. The school system is financed by some parameters, but the social composition is not one factor that influences the systems. Here I give you just some figures about social inequality. Here you have the parents, the education of the parents, low, middle and high education of the parents, and here is the probability that a child will attend a higher secondary schools. Higher secondary school means if you finish this school, you will get the allowance to go to a university. And you see if the parents have high educational level, the probability is 73%. And if the education of the parents is low, it's 34%. Or if you look at the migration background, if the child has a migration background, or the parents have a migration background, the probability that children will attend a high secondary school is 42%. If the child has no migration background, the probability is about 5.5. But what is most important is the so-called composition effect, or the social composition. Here you see different line. Each line presents a certain individual, a certain school child, and the different level reflects the different chances, the different individual chances. And here you have the composition of the schools. If in the schools there's a very good social composition, that means there are many children from upper classes, no migration background. For example, if you have here one child, I think it's a female speaking a foreign language at home, Turkish background, the probability that this child will not reach the lowest level of competences is 45%. But if this children is in a class where many social disadvantaged children are, so where the social composition, where a lot of social disadvantaged children go in this class, the probability increases to 80%. So the social composition, I think this was one of the findings already from the Coleman report, that the social composition of the class has an important effect on the performance of a child, and this is true for any other combination. If you look, even for a child, this is a child from the upper class, an Austrian child from the upper class. If this child would go in a class with many social disadvantaged children, the probability of low performance will be 25%. If this child is going, which is the most probable case, in a school with with very few disadvantaged children, the probability will only be 8%. So you see the social composition, how many children from lower classes or how many children with migration background are in one class influences the individual performance of the children. And this was then we started to discuss what can Austria or what can a school system do in order to, first of all, to decrease this gradient, and then to reduce the gap between the different social groups. And in the literature you can find the following political measures. One is, one can try to reduce the segregation or the social composition in the class by quotas for schools. This was done in the United States. It's called about busing. I think it's a model that is not realistic for Austria, because parents will still avoid to send their children in these social segregated schools. Which is more effective is an indirect reduction by housing policy, so that you look that in a certain urban area you have less segregation, then you will also have less segregation in the schools. So this is a policy, for example, in the Netherlands, this has turned out to be a good measure to reduce the segregation in the school, if you have a good housing policy. But nonetheless, I think we know that segregation will remain, even if you introduce a good housing policy. So we say perhaps we should accept that there will be social disadvantaged schools, but we should try to help these socially disadvantaged schools to support them in order to be able to improve, to give more support to the children. And this is the idea of need-based financing a school system. The idea is quite simple. It was not invented by us. This model is in work in some countries. For example, in the Netherlands, since 30 years. It has been implemented in some parts of the Swiss. I think in Hamburg more than 20 years. So there are many examples where this idea is already in practice. The idea is of 3 steps. The first step is that we have to compute a social index for each school. And the index varies between 100 and 100 plus X. And X is the money the society is willing to invest for social disadvantaged children. So if a country does, Austria now has an X of 0, so we can say Austria is nowadays nothing investing in social balancing the situation. The next step is, if we have computed the social index for each school, we have to transfer the resources to each schools based on the index. For example, if a school has an index of 120, this would mean that the school gets 20% additional resources in order to support the disadvantaged children. And the third step is we should specify how the school should use the additional resources. And what is important, I think this is concerned with our previous speech, we also must have some measures how to evaluate this intervention. How can we measure if the money was invested in a useful way so that the social disadvantaged children improve their competences. The definition of X as a political issue, X should be sufficiently high to contribute to social balance. Our proposal in the national report was that we should create an index from 100 to 200. So if a child has a low migration background, is speaking another language, comes from a lower class, the school get the double resources for this child in order to have some compensate this disadvantage. I will discuss here, this is the Austrian discussion, how should we finance this model. I think the financing this model is able by redistribution of the money. We have a lot of money in our educational system, and by redistribution of some of this part of the money, it would be possible to implement formula-based financing. I will not speak much in details about the definition or about the methodological problems of computing the social index. Perhaps I should have done this because it's a conference on edometrics, but I have more concentrated on the second and the third steps. But of course there are different models. For example, the Netherlands and the Switzerland, they only use few indicators. Netherlands now use only one indicator, that's the education of the parents. And if the parents have low education, the school gets for this child 125% more resources. 4 years ago, Netherlands has used two indicators, that's migration background and education of the parent. In Switzerland, it's usual to have 4 indicators. In contrast, for example, federal state in Germany uses many indicators, about 30 indicators to compute the index. So there are different models in the how to compute the index. I would say that we should use few variables, but we should collect many variables in order to be able to make some multiple imputation or to make some validation. But in order to communicate to people, it's not useful to use 30 variables. You must have a very simple system so that every citizen can understand the model. Then we have 2 ways how to collect the data. We can collect the data via survey. For example, this is done in Hamburg or in federal states of Germany, or we can use register data. This is done in Switzerland, for example. And we can have data on the school level and data on the district level. The Institute of Higher Studies in Austria has developed a model which is based on the district level. We have a lot of problems still with data preparation. We have, of course, for example, if we ask parents about their education or about the migration background, we will have unit non-response, and we will have item non-response and measurement errors, and it is important to handle these problems because unit non-response, for example, is not random. We have a high correlation of social status and unit non-response. Parents with lower status have a less participation rate in surveys, for example. And our task is by unit non-response, by some multiple imputation, we must find a good model to estimate the values for these people. Then we can compute an index, a simple sum formula, or we can use some multivariate methods. We have used multiple correspondence analysis and other models, but I think the first one is the best one, to have a simple sum formula. This is the index we proposed in the National Educational Report. It's an index of 4 variables. It's the education of parents, the occupation of parents, migration background, and language spoken at home. And we have 4 dichotomous variables, very simple index. The parents only finish compulsory school. The parents are on the lowest 20% of the occupational positions. The child has migration background, and the family speak another language. And we simply add this index and divide it by 4, so that we can say for each social disadvantages we provide 25% of the basic resources. This is the formula how to finance the school system. The idea is quite simple. We have some basic budget which depends on the number of students and the budget of the students and still on the school type. But this is what is now our concern. So this is the index-based financing of the school systems. And perhaps I will come back, we can enlarge this idea of formula-based financing by achievement. Should we also consider achievement? For example, in Austria we compute for each school an expected value. Expected values assuming the social composition of the school. If you accept this social composition, what can we expect from the schools? And this is the idea is if a school has a better performance than the expectation, should we give some bonus to the schools? And then I think you also have this in Poland, we have very small schools with 5 children, for example, and if the basic financing is 6,000 euros per child, the school will only have 30,000 euros, and by this money you cannot finance a teacher, so the school will have no teacher. Then you can discuss to close the school or to give the school additional money to have a teacher. The model of implementation, it was already discussed, how can the model be implemented? The way is just to allocate the money to Austria, which would be a revolution in Austria because we have a very hierarchical distribution system of money, and nowadays no school get any money. A school only get teachers. But in this way, I would like to propose at least these additional resources should be money, and each school should get at least a certain amount of money. Then the school is asked to develop a proposal. How the school is asked, what will you do with the money in order to improve the situation or to improve the competences of the social disadvantaged children. Then the proposal is discussed by school partners. And then the system is implemented, and then I think this comes back to our previous presentation. Then we need some internal evaluation and some measures. Was this implementation successful? For example, a school decides one reason why for the poor performance of a school may be violence in the school. So the school decides I make some prevention or some programs to reduce the violence in the schools, and then I want to make some internal evaluation. Was I successful? Or another school might have problems that the children do not do the housework or the homework they have to do for school, and then they make some afternoon school, after-day schools, and then they want to measure I'm successful. And after some years, for example, after 3 or 4 years, there should be some external evaluation of the program. So this would be the way of implementation, and of course we need some support structures in order to help the school to develop a proposal or the school partners. And here we have also the standard testing. We have already infrastructure in Austria. School partners maybe look like this, who should decide about the proposal. This should be the head of the schools, then perhaps 3 teachers. 2 parents are in the school board who decide how the money should be used. Then what is important, other professionals at school, for example, psychologists, if there's a psychologist at school. Then of course I would propose that students should also participate in this approach. Then there's always discussion, what's about 12-year school children? Are they able to participate or not to participate? There's a discussion, I would say, that 12 years school children can participate. Then the maintainer of the school, this is in most cases the community, and we need further regional partners. For example, the idea is if it's a primary school, this may be a cultural or sport club who is this regional partner, and if it's the secondary school, this may be industry or business who says what competences I will need if the school children finish the school and apply for a job at my company. And this are the expected effects which we then should measure and try if our theory is correct. So this is our theory. We have the social composition of the school. The social composition of the school defines the index. The index combined with autonomy We hope that this will help us to promote factors that promote achievement and motivation. So we must have more motivation in the schools, and we must have an increase of the achievement, and we hope by the index and by the proposal the school made, the school is able to improve these factors, and if we improve these factors, the achievement level of the school will increase. And if the achievement level in the school increase, then we will also have reduction of educational poverty. We will have more justice in participation, so we will have a higher probability to reach the second aim, that every child should have a minimum level of education. And we know that this is also correlated with equal opportunity. And perhaps if the social composition, or if we have the information that the school system have a higher achievement level, then the social composition of the school will change too, and here we need some infrastructure. This model is not tested as a whole model. We have no data to test this path model in the whole way, but we have some boards for some from the literature and from some empirical findings. For example, factors increasing motivation and achievement in disadvantaged schools. There's a very good OECD report, and there's also some a report from Van Ackeren. What are the conditions? The conditions seem we need competent school leaders, we need a positive climate, good positive social relations, we need motivated and qualified teachers, we need, what is the most important factor, good teaching. We need cooperation with parents and community. We need all-day schools, for example, perhaps fusion of schools, and perhaps in some cases shutdown of schools. And good teaching means that we have demanding tasks. The teacher formulates demanding tasks for the children, that we have an orientation towards students, and we have a good classroom management. That means that we can concentrate the teaching, the time for teaching in the class. The model is not empirically tested as a whole, but we have a lot of empirical evidence that the model is correct. I give you only one correlation between autonomy, and this is the performance in mathematics, performance in reading, the percent of top performers and the percent of risk, and you see the autonomy of the school leads to a higher mathematics score in mathematics, leads to a higher score in readings, increases the number of top performers and reduces the number of risk. We have, for example, no correlation with the number of children who go to an educational system already with the age of 4. Or we have also no influence about the formal qualification of the teacher. Autonomy in Austria is autonomy is a key factor in this model, and here you see this are the data, BIST 2006. I think OECD has not collected this information in BIST 2009 and 2012. And here is the autonomy, and you see Austria has a very poor autonomy in the school system. 0 is the OECD average. These are countries with high autonomy at the school system, and these are countries with low autonomy. I'm just looking where Poland is in this situation, a little bit more autonomy than Austria. Perhaps if you know your system, you can understand that in Austria the autonomy is underdeveloped. Yes, to make some conclusion, formula-based financing means it supports social balance. I think it's a transparent and objective systems. It promotes autonomy of the school, and if we introduce this school partnership, it also promotes democracy at schools. It provides incentives for engaged schools and teachers. It prohibits stigmatization. One way a school can now get additional money is by labeling the children as extraordinary school child. If you say this school child has handicapped, they get additional money. So you must stigmatize or labeling a child in order to get additional money. If you use the index-based finance, this is not necessary. You will get additional money by the social index. The requirements is we need perhaps some additional budget, which I think it's not possible now in the Austrian situation, or we need a redistribution of the budget in this direction. We need competent school leaders, and we need a structure for supporting the schools. And I will finish with some questions. These are questions I always get in discussions. In Austria, perhaps you will have other questions, so by cultural difference. One question is always, how can we guarantee that schools don't manipulate data? For example, if we make the survey in the schools, and perhaps each school, the school get money if it has many disadvantaged children, so they say to the parents, please cross low education. This may be a kind of manipulation. How can we avoid this manipulation? Should the use of additional resources be combined with certain criteria? There's always the idea that our schools are not competent, so I must have a very large list of criteria. The school must write a proposal of 100 pages in order to get the money. I think that's not a good way, because schools who are disadvantaged, they don't have time to write a long proposal to get additional money. How strong should the government supervision be? This question depends. If you discuss with the government, they want to have a strong supervision and control structure. If you discuss with school, they want to have a less supervision. Is a sufficient structure available to support the schools? Should an extended schools partnership be implemented? This is also very controversially discussed. Should the formula be extended with achievement and regional factors? These are the ideas I show you already, that we can extend this formula by achievement and regional factors. Thank you, and if you're interested, there's a lot of literature about this topic, and I think there's also, it's a Polish colleague, Lewacic, funding school systems by formulas. She was professor at the London School of Economics, and she has written a lot of pioneer papers on this topic. Thank you very much for your for your attention.